A man can spend 30 years learning to tell a real need from a rehearsed one. And then, on a single ordinary night, a child can unteach him all of it, in the space of one short sentence. Nathan Brandt was about to learn that lesson. He just didn't know it yet. It was late, and the house was too still, the way it always was now. He was sitting alone in the front room of a place built for a family that had somehow never arrived, when a sound reached him from the porch. A knock. 3 soft taps against the heavy door. It was not the knock of a courier, or a neighbor, or a man come to sell him something. It was smaller than that. Unsure. The kind of knock that has already braced itself for a no, before the door has even opened. Nathan Rossi crossed the room, and opened the door only partway. The careful gap of a man who had spent his whole life keeping the world at arm's length. A little girl stood on the porch. Black, no older than 9 or 10, with a baby boy held tight against her chest. She was small and thin, and so worn down that the tiredness no longer read as tiredness. It had hardened into a kind of stillness she seemed to have decided to live inside. Her coat hung open at the collar. One braid had come loose and lay against her cheek. The baby's head rested heavy on her shoulder, his face turned into the curve of her neck. It was quiet. But it was the wrong kind of quiet. The hush that settles over a child once hunger has carried him past the point of crying. She lifted her eyes to the man in the doorway, with a careful, frightened politeness that somehow made her look even smaller than she was. "Sir," she said. "I'm only asking for a glass of milk." Nathan did not answer. And into that silence, the girl rushed on, the way children rush when they believe a pause is only a no that hasn't finished arriving. "Not money," she said. "Just 1 glass. And if you don't have a whole glass, half is fine. It's for my little brother." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her, into the dark. There was no adult standing on the walk. No car idling at the curb. No grown-up tucked into the shadows, watching to see whether the performance would land. There was only the porch, the black sweep of lawn beyond it, and the soft pools of light his security lamps threw down across the empty grass. "Where are your parents?" he asked. "We live with our grandmother." "That isn't what I asked." The girl swallowed. Then she answered with the plain, unguarded honesty that only a child can manage, the kind that leaves a grown man no room at all to maneuver. "I don't know where my mother is, sir. And I don't know where my father is, either." A second voice came from behind him. His wife, Eleanor, moving toward the door, pulling her robe tighter against the cold air leaking in. "Nathan. Who is it?" "A child," he said, his eyes still on the girl. "Asking for milk." Eleanor looked past his shoulder, and something in her face changed. Not into cruelty. Into something more guarded than that, and harder to name. The practiced wariness of a woman who had lived long enough in a beautiful neighborhood to learn that beautiful neighborhoods attract beautiful stories, and who wanted this particular story gone from her porch quickly, before it could turn into anything she might have to feel. Nathan turned back to the girl. "What's your name?" "Imani." "And the baby?" "Theo." "Imani. Why are you here?" "Your window was still lit," she said. "So I knocked." "That doesn't tell me why you're at my house." "I knocked at other houses first," she said. "The big white one on the corner." Nobody came. "The one with the green shutters." A woman looked out through the glass. Then her porch light went dark. "A man across the road told me to get off his steps. And then I saw your light, and I thought, maybe." She stopped. Embarrassed, all at once, by the size of the hope she had just said out loud. "Maybe you'd have a little milk to spare." And there it was. The old caution, rising in Nathan, slow and familiar and cold as ever. Because he had money. And money draws stories the way a porch lamp draws moths out of the dark. So many of those stories are true. Many of them are simply well practiced. A man in his position learns, over the years, to find the danger where everyone else only sees the need. He had been sued for trying to help. He had been led to by people who had rehearsed the exact catch in their voices. He had watched his own kindness get picked up, turned over, and used against him like a thing he had handed across the table himself. So the voice that spoke first was the voice of caution. "Imani," he said. "You can't go from door to door at night, asking strangers for things. It isn't safe." "I know." "Then you should be home." "I can't." "Why not?" "I'm lost." "Then you need to find an adult." "I tried," she said. "There wasn't any other way." Eleanor let out a quiet breath beside him. "Nathan. This is the exact reason the neighborhood put up that sign." She raised a hand and pointed past the porch, toward the black metal post by the gate, lit by the small camera mounted above it. The white letters were easy enough to read, even from where they stood. "No soliciting. No loitering. No trespassing. Private residence. Violators will be reported." Eleanor's voice stayed even and smooth. But there was iron underneath the smoothness. "That sign is there for a reason. We don't let people wander up to this house in the middle of the night, asking for food or money. We simply don't." Imani looked at the sign. Then she looked back at Eleanor. And what the child said next cut deeper than any argument ever could have. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't know what loitering meant." Eleanor folded her arms. "It means you shouldn't be standing here." And Nathan watched that sentence land on the little girl. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She only lifted the baby a little higher on her hip, and nodded, the way a child nods when a teacher corrects her in front of the whole class. "Yes, ma'am." He should have closed the door right then. Eleanor was waiting for him too. The sign was waiting for him too. The whole guarded street, with its cameras and its gate codes and its quiet, unspoken agreements about who belonged on it, was waiting for him too. Instead, Nathan asked one more question. "Why aren't you with your grandmother?" Imani's eyes came up fast. "She's at the hospital." "Which hospital?" "Riverside General." "How did she get there?" And now the words came faster, with the breathless urgency of a child trying to make the grown-ups understand before they grow tired of listening and turn away. "Mrs. Whitfield from upstairs was in our kitchen. She said Grandma got real sick. The ambulance had already come and taken her before I got home. It was late. The bus broke down, and I had to walk part of the way from school. Mrs. Whitfield wrote everything down for me. She said to wait for her nephew to come and drive us. But Till was hungry. And I thought I could find the hospital myself. He had the paper. He followed the streets. But I don't know this side of town. And then I got lost." Something shifted in Nathan's face. "Used barely." "You have the paper?" Imani hesitated. Then she nodded. With one careful hand, still balancing the baby in the crook of her other arm, she drew a folded square of notebook paper out of her coat pocket. It was soft at the creases, dry at the edges, smudged from being held too hard, too long, by a child who had been gripping it like a map to the only safe place left in the world. She held it out to him. "Nathan," Eleanor said quietly. "Don't take anything from her." But Nathan had already taken it. He unfolded it under the porch light. The handwriting was uneven, but clear. Blue ink, with deep pressure marks where the pen had been driven into the page in a hurry. Riverside General Hospital. Emergency Department. Cardiac Care Unit. Patient, Ruth Caldwell. Brought in by ambulance, around 6:20 p.m. Neighbor contact, Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield, apartment 2C. If Imani comes home, tell her grandma is at Riverside. What for Marcus to drive her? Do not let the children walk alone. Nathan read it once. Then he read it again. Eleanor watched his face. What does it say? He turned the paper so she could see, and his voice dropped low. She's telling the truth. And for the first time that night, something in Eleanor's expression gave way. Imani stood very still on the porch, as though she somehow understood that the truth does its best work in silence, and that the worst thing she could do now was rush it. Nathan looked at the note one more time. Riverside General. Cardiac care. Ruth Kelville. The name brushed against something far back inside him. Something faint, and old, and not yet shaped into a memory he could hold in his hands. It was like catching a few bars of a song through the wall of the next room. Familiar. And just out of reach. He looked down at the child again. You walked all this way, following this? I tried to follow the bus road first, she said. Then the road split in two. I asked a lady at a gas station, but she didn't know the way. Then the stores started closing. And Theo got so heavy. So I started knocking on the houses with lights on, hoping somebody would just point me in the right direction. She paused. I wasn't trying to break your sign. Eleanor looked away. And Nathan asked the last question. He already knew the answer would hurt. He asked it anyway. Why only one glass? Imani looked down at the baby in her arms. Because one glass is enough for him. And what about you? She gave a small shrug. Too worn out to bother making it brave. I can fight it off better. Fight what off? The hungry feeling. She nodded, simple as anything. I'm older. Nathan felt his wife's eyes on the side of his face. And he felt the house at his back, though. The warm air pouring out the open door. The polished floor under his shoes. The refrigerator standing full in the kitchen, packed with food no one in that house would ever miss, so much of it that half a glass of milk had become, somewhere across the years, completely invisible to him. Eleanor chose her words with care. Nathan. If the child needs help, there are services for that. That's what those programs exist for. We can't just bring children into our home. Imani turned toward her at once. I don't need to stay, ma'am. I just need milk for Theo. And maybe someone to point me toward the hospital. He won't touch a thing. Nathan folded the paper once, and closed it inside his hand. Eleanor, he said quietly. There's milk in the refrigerator. Her lips parted. But no words came. He turned back to the girl. Come inside. Imani didn't move. I'll just drink water, she said. Theo's the one who needs, I heard you, Nathan said, gentler now. He'll have milk. And so will you. I don't have any money. I didn't ask for money. She studied his face, still searching for the trap that grown people usually keep hidden somewhere behind a kind word. Are you going to call somebody to come and take us away? No. And he meant it. He looked once at the sign by the gate. Then at the folded paper in his fist. Then at the girl on his porch, who had just apologized to him for being hungry. Eleanor said his name one more time. A warning, a question, and a plea, all folded into two short syllables. Nathan. He did not turn around. She's coming in. Imani stepped over the threshold the way some children learn to move through the entire world. Carefully. Apologizing with her shoulders. She held herself in so she wouldn't brush the wall, and watched her own feet so she wouldn't track anything across the floor. She moved like a child who had learned, early and hard, that adults will change their minds over the smallest things. The whole light fell full across her face, and up close, Nathan saw it plainly. She wasn't sleepy. She was emptied out. There is a difference between the two, and he recognized it. He closed the door behind them. And for one strange, suspended moment, the four of them stood together in the bright entryway. The billionaire. His wife. The lost girl. And the small boy whose hunger had quietly steered every one of them into the same room. You're really going to drive them to Riverside, Eleanor said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes. Imani looked up at him. You know where it is? I do. Will they let me see Grandma? Nathan glanced at the name on the note again. Girl Tells Billionaire. The faint bell rang a second time, a little clearer now, and still not loud enough to name. If she's there, he said, we'll find her. He led them toward the kitchen, and told Imani she could sit. But she looked to Eleanor first, asking with her eyes for a permission no one had thought to offer her yet. Eleanor still stood back, arms crossed, robe knotted tight at the waist. The note had softened her face, but only a little, and not nearly enough to call it welcome. She was a woman who believed in order. In rules. In systems that kept a lad from sliding into chaos. And 2 lost children in her kitchen at midnight fit none of the systems she trusted. It's all right, Nathan said. That stool, there. Imani climbed onto the edge of it with great effort, keeping Theo on her lap the whole way up. And then, without being asked, she tucked her legs so the baby's shoes wouldn't scuff the white cabinet beneath the counter. Nathan noticed. And he pretended not to. Because there are kinds of dignity that only shrink when you point at them. It took a small saucepan down from the rack, poured in the milk, and set it over a low flame. The motion felt clumsy in his hands. Unpracticed. He could not remember the last time he had warmed milk for another living soul. Eleanor moved in close beside him, dropping her voice. Nathan. You need to call Riverside before you do anything else. I will. Now. He glanced over at Imani. Let the boy drink first. She handed you a note. That doesn't mean we know the whole story. No, he agreed. But it means we know enough not to put a child back out in the dark. Her mouth tightened. She didn't argue. Maybe because there was no honest argument left to make. Instead she opened a cabinet and took down a clean mug, briskly, with a kind of busy impatience, as though usefulness might keep her from having to feel anything at all. Nathan poured the warm milk and set the mug on the counter. Careful. It's warm. Imani touched the side of it first, testing the heat the way a grown woman would. Then she lifted it to Theo's lips. The baby drank in slow swallows, both small hands wrapped around the mug, though it was plain that Imani carried most of its weight. His eyelids fluttered. A little color crept back into his cheeks. Nathan watched in silence. After a few mouthfuls, Imani tried to take the cup away. He can have more, Nathan said. He already had some. There's a whole carton. She looked at him as if she couldn't decide whether he was telling the truth, or laying a trap. Grandma says never take more than you need. And what do you need? She looked down at her brother. For him to stop being hungry. And you? I already told you. He can wait. Eleanor turned her face away. A small movement. But Nathan caught it. Some answers make it very hard to keep being practical. He opened the refrigerator again. He took out a tub of soup, sliced turkey, a wedge of cheese, the bowl of berries Eleanor kept for her mornings. He poured the soup into a pot and laid bread out on a plate. Imani watched the food pile up with rising alarm. That's too much, she said. It's just food. I didn't ask for food. No. You asked for milk. I'm adding soup. I don't know if Grandma can pay you back for all that. Nathan stopped, his hand on the handle of the pot. Nobody is asking your grandmother to pay for soup, he said. Imani dropped her eyes. She doesn't like to owe people. That makes 2 of us. Eleanor's head turned sharply, as if the answer had come from a corner of her husband she hadn't expected to meet tonight. Nathan ignored the look, and stirred the pot. What happened when you got home from school? He asked, keeping his voice flat and even, so the question wouldn't feel like a trap snapping shut. Mrs. Whitfield was in our kitchen. She had her coat on, and she was holding Grandma's purse. He thought Grandma had gone to the store. But Mrs. Whitfield said she got real sick, and the ambulance came and took her. Did she stay with you? She tried. But she had to go back upstairs, because her husband can't be by himself too long. So she wrote the paper. She said her nephew would drive us once he got off work. But Theo kept saying Nana. And I thought, if Grandma woke up in that place and we weren't there, she'd be scared. Sis always been scared of hospitals. Eleanor's expression flickered. So you left before the nephew came, she said. Imani nodded. I thought I could just follow the paper. You can read all that? Nathan asked. Some of it, she said. I know Riverside. I know the word road. I know Grandma's name. And I know numbers, if they aren't too long. Nathan looked down at the note he'd set beside the stove. The address meant nothing to him. Read it without effort. But for the first time he tried to picture those same words in a child's hands, in the dark, on a corner where the shop windows had gone black one by one, and the distance of it opened beneath the page like a hole in the floor. How far did you get? He asked. I took a bus first. It turned around. You rode a bus? I had $2 in my backpack. Lunch money Grandma let me keep. The driver told me where to get off. But I got off in the wrong place, because Theo dropped his sock, and I bent down to grab it, and when I stood back up everybody had moved, and the door shut, and the bus just pulled away without me. Lord have mercy, Eleanor murmured. Imani glanced at her, unsure whether she had done something wrong. You didn't do anything bad, Nathan said. You were trying to reach your grandmother. I was supposed to wait. You were trying to get to your family. That isn't the same thing as disobeying. He set a small bowl of soup in front of her, with a piece of bread alongside it. Eat. A little. Imani looked at the bowl. Then at Theo, who had gone soft and heavy now that the milk had done its quiet work. Can he have soup? When it cools. You first. She shook her head. Eleanor let out a breath. And then, almost against her own will, she said something gentle. Imani. You're going to slide right off that stool if you keep pretending you aren't hungry. Imani studied her for a long moment. Then she picked up the spoon. She took one small, careful sip, as if the soup belonged to someone else, and she had been granted permission only for the very edge of it. Nathan used the moment to make the call. He stepped a few feet away, but kept himself where Imani could still see him, because he did not want the child imagining he had slipped off to summon someone who would come and take her away. The operator transferred him twice. The third person he reached began to listen faster the moment he said his name, and that, more than anything, bothered him. This is Nathan Brandt, he said. I'm calling about a patient. Ruth killed Bill. Brought in by ambulance. Around 6:20 this evening. I have her granddaughter here with me. Imani. The nurse on the line went quiet for a beat. You have Imani? Nathan looked over at the girl. She had stopped eating. Yes. Oh, thank goodness. And the relief in the woman's voice was real, the kind you cannot fake down a phone line. We've had security watching for her. The neighbor called twice. The man who was supposed to bring the children never showed up with them. Is Mrs. Caldwell there? She is. Sis in cardiac evaluation. I can't give you details over the phone unless you're family. I understand. I'm bringing the children in. Please do. And Mary Brandt, yes. The nurse's voice softened. Tell Imani her grandmother has been asking for her. Every single time she's awake enough to say a word. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment. I'll tell her. He hung up, and turned back around. Imani had set down her spoon. Her face had gone still in that terrible way a child's face goes still when she is bracing herself for the bad news before anyone has even spoken it out loud. She's there, Nathan said. Your grandmother is at Riverside. Imani's hands tightened around Theo. And then she asked the question that struck him harder than is she alive ever could have. Is she mad at me? Nathan crouched, bringing himself down closer to her level. No, he said gently. The nurse told me she's been asking for you. The whole time. Imani's chin trembled once. She swallowed it back down. She's awake. Some. Can we go now? Yes. She slid off the stool at once, almost losing her balance, because Theo was still heavy in her arms. Nathan's hand came out by instinct, then stopped, just short of touching her. I can carry him, if you want. Imani pulled the baby closer. Nathan nodded, and let it go. All right. You carry him. Eleanor had been standing by the counter the whole time, watching. Her face was no longer hard. It was troubled now, which was something else, and something better. Nathan, she said. Let me come with you. I looked at her, surprised. She tugged her robe tighter, then shook her head at herself, as if she had just caught her own reflection in a mirror she had been avoiding all evening. Not like this, she said. Give me 5 minutes to change. Imani looked between the two of them. You don't have to come, ma'am. Eleanor met the child's eyes. And for the first time that whole night, she seemed to actually see the girl, instead of the problem the girl had walked in carrying. I know I don't, she said quietly. That's exactly why I should. While Eleanor dressed, Nathan went out to bring the car around. Behind him, his wife quietly wrapped the bread Imani hadn't finished. For later, she said, a little awkwardly. And the child answered, thank you, ma'am. In the garage, Nathan opened the rear door of the black SUV and switched on the interior lights. The leather in the back glowed pale and untouched, because no child had ever once ridden in it. He stared at the latch system built into the seat, the one he had never had a reason to notice in his life, and felt, absurdly, as if the car itself were sitting in judgment of him. Eleanor came out with a coat thrown over her clothes and her hair pulled back. Imani followed, Theo tucked under a soft blanket Eleanor had pulled from the hall closet without a word about it. Nathan helped the girl up into the seat, careful not to touch her unless she reached for him first. Eleanor climbed in beside her, but left a small space between them, offering her presence without pressing it on the child. As the SUV rolled out of the garage, the headlights swept across the sign by the gate. No soliciting. No loitering. No trespassing. Nathan watched it slide past in the mirror and vanish into the dark behind them. I said nothing. In the back seat, Imani whispered to the baby. We're going to see Nana now. Riverside General was 20 minutes away. Nathan knew the route by heart, because his company made deliveries there twice a week. He had toured its wards. He had shaken the hand of its board chairman and signed a check large enough to have his own name set in brass on a wall beside the new surgical suite. But tonight, for the first time in his life, he was driving to that same hospital through the eyes of a child who had tried to reach it with a folded scrap of paper and a starving baby in her arms. Seen that way, the road felt much, much longer. He drove faster than he usually allowed himself. Not recklessly. Years of discipline kept his hand steady on the wheel, even as something unfamiliar pressed against the inside of his chest, asking quietly to be named. The city at that hour was stripped down to its bones. Traffic lights blinked yellow over empty crossings. Storefronts stood dark, except for the rare gas station or all-night diner glowing like a small, lonely island in a black sea. In the back, Eleanor stayed angled toward the girl. Every so often she adjusted the blanket, or checked that the baby had room to breathe. She didn't say much. But her silence had changed. It no longer pushed the child away. It made a space for her. You all right back there? Nathan asked, watching them in the mirror. Yes, sir, Imani said quickly. But her eyes told a different story entirely. Nathan didn't challenge it. He knew a little about pride. Especially the particular kind that grows in a person who has had too little, for far too long. How much longer? Imani asked, quieter now. About 15 minutes. We're close. She nodded, and he could almost see her counting the minutes in her head, one at a time. Do you know what part of the hospital your grandmother's in? Eleanor asked. Imani shook her head. The paper just says emergency, and the heart place. The cardiac unit, Eleanor said, softly, half to herself. That usually means they're watching her closely. Is that bad? Eleanor hesitated. And for a second, Nathan thought she might fall back on something vague and safe. But she didn't. It means they're taking it seriously, she said. And that's a good thing. Imani seemed to accept that. The car went quiet again. But it was not the same quiet as before. This one had weight to it now. And the direction. Nathan turned onto Hawthorne Avenue, and the shape of Riverside General rose up ahead, tall and pale, lit from within like something alive and breathing. The emergency entrance glowed beneath a wide awning. Ambulances pulled in and out. Glass doors slid open and shut in a rhythm that never quite stopped, the steady, mechanical heartbeat of a place that does not sleep. Nathan pulled up close, and parked. This is it, he said. Imani leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the building. And there was something in her face he recognized. Not fear, exactly. Something harder than fear. The awareness that whatever happened in the next few minutes would matter more than anything that had come before it. I'll go in first, he said. You stay here, just for a second. Her hand tightened around Theo. I can come. You will. You just need to talk to someone, so they don't leave you waiting out here again. Eleanor touched the girl's arm. He's right. Let him go ahead. Imani nodded, though every line of her small body hated the idea of being left behind, even for a moment. Nathan crossed quickly to the sliding doors, and the air of the emergency room met him as he stepped through. Cool. Sterile. Carrying that faint antiseptic smell, and something heavier underneath it. He had walked into hospitals many times. Never like this. Never without an appointment. Never without his own name already waiting for him at the front desk. The nurse looked up. I'm here about Ruth Caldwell, he said. Her granddaughter Imani is with me, out in the car. Recognition flickered across the woman's face. You're Mary Brandt. He nodded once. The children are safe. He didn't want to bring them in until I knew where to take them. Bring them in, she said. Her grandmother has been asking for that little girl every time she opens her eyes. We get them to her the moment we can. Nathan turned and walked back out without another word. Imani was already standing on the curb, Theo in her arms, scanning the great pale face of the building as if she could see straight through the walls to the woman lying somewhere inside. They're expecting you, Nathan said. And Imani did not wait for anything else. She moved toward the doors with quick, careful steps, like a girl afraid of slipping out of the moment before it finished. Inside, the hospital was louder than it had seemed from the curb. Voices crossed over one another. A stretcher rolled past. A machine beeped somewhere down a corridor, steady and patient, keeping. Dime. A staff member came to guide them. This way. They moved down the hall, past doors marked with words Imani didn't know, past people sitting with tired eyes and folded hands. And Nathan noticed how many of them looked up as the group went by. Not because of him. Because of her. A child walking, instead of being carried, with a purpose far too heavy for her size. Near the turn toward the cardiac unit, the guide slowed. She's just ahead. Imani stopped for a second. Nathan looked down at her. You ready? She nodded. But her voice came out small. What if she doesn't wake up? Nathan chose his words the way a man chooses his footing on ice. Then you'll still be there. And she'll know it. Imani held on to that. They reached the room. Through the glass panel in the door, Nathan saw an older woman lying in the bed. Her skin pale against the white sheets. Her hair thin and silver on the pillow. Machines stood around her, quiet but constant, lines and wires tethering her to the world she was still holding on to. Imani stepped forward. Nana. The word was barely louder than a breath. But something in the room shifted when she said it. And as Nathan looked at the woman's face, something inside him finally moved. The thing that had been circling at the edge of his mind all night long, faint and out of reach, came rushing forward at last. Not in pieces now. Whole. A road, late at night. A rake. The shriek of metal folding in on itself. The taste of blood in his own mouth. Headlights pointed at the wrong angle. And the voice. A woman's voice. Low, and steady, and absolutely unwilling to break. Don't you close your eyes on me. You stay here. You hear me? You stay right here with me. Nathan drew in a sharp breath. Eleanor heard it. Nathan? But he couldn't answer. Because for the first time that whole night, he was not looking at a stranger in a hospital bed. It was looking at the woman who had once refused to let him die. And standing in front of her was the child who had knocked on his door asking for nothing more than a glass of milk. The nurse pushed the door open, and Imani slipped inside before anyone could say a word, moving with a quiet urgency that did not belong to a child but to someone who had already learned, far too young, that hesitation can cost you the very thing you love. She went straight to the bed. Still holding Theo, she rose up onto her toes, just enough to see over the rail. Nana. The woman didn't open her eyes right away. But her fingers twitched against the thin sheet. A small movement. Almost nothing. To Imani, it was a shout. I'm here, she whispered. I came. I got lost. But I came. Eleanor stepped in behind her, slow, careful not to crowd the room. Nathan came last, and stopped just past the doorway, because he did not entirely trust his legs to carry him any nearer. Nana, Imani said again, softer now, coaxing the old woman back from somewhere far away. You told me not to be late. The woman's eyelids fluttered. And Nathan felt it before he saw it. That shift. That fragile crossing from one side of consciousness to the other. He had felt it once before, years ago, from the opposite side of a bed. Back then, he had been the one lying still, slipping in and out of the dark, while someone else had been the voice that refused to let him go. The woman's eyes opened slowly. Clouded with pain and exhaustion. But they focused. Fierce on the ceiling. Then the wall. And then, as if drawn by something stronger than effort, they found Imani. Baby, she whispered. Imani's whole face broke open. Nana. Jure wak. Jure here. Yes, child. I'm here. The woman's gaze drifted, searching. Where's the boy? Imani shifted Theo so the old woman could see him. He's right here too. She let out a fragile breath that somehow carried more weight than any full one could. Thank the Lord. And then Nathan found himself moving, without deciding to. He crossed the room and stopped at the side of the bed, looking down. Up close, there was no doubt left in him at all. The years had changed her. Lying her face. Seeing her down. But the bones of her were the same. The strength was still there, underneath all the weakness. And the voice, quieter now, carried the same unbending steadiness he remembered from the night that should have been the last of his life. You, he said. Barely above a whisper. The woman turned her head toward him. It took her a moment to find his face, to set the man standing beside her bed against a memory buried under a decade of ordinary days. Nathan didn't rush her. He said nothing more. He simply stood there, in the light, and let her look at him. Her brow furrowed. And then, slowly, recognition came. Not sharp. Not all at once. But real. She began, and her voice caught. The road. Nathan nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Her eyes widened, just a fraction. You made it. The same words. The same quiet certainty she must have spoken into the dark a decade ago, over a dying stranger's broken body. Because you wouldn't let me go, Nathan said. The room went still. Imani looked back and forth between them, confused, but alert, sensing that something enormous had just walked into the space and settled down among them, without yet understanding what it was. Ruth studied his face, confirming what her memory was already telling her. You cleaned up real nice, she said faintly. A breath of something like a smile moved through the room. You look exactly the same, Nathan said. Now that's a lie. Yes, ma'am. It is. Imani tugged at her grandmother's sleeve. Nana. You know him? Ruth's eyes came back to the child. I do, she said. I met this man once. A long time ago on a very bad night. Nathan leaned closer. You pulled me out of a car 10 years ago, he said. Out on the old service road, behind this very hospital. You stayed with me until the ambulance came. You held my head off the gravel, and you would not let me fall asleep. Ruth's expression softened with the memory. You were bleeding bad, she murmured. I remember it. He told you to keep your eyes open, and you went and shut them anyway. She shook her head, the faintest motion. I never figured you'd remember some old woman kneeling in the dark. I never forgot you, Nathan said. And then, more honestly than he had meant to, I just never found you in time to say thank you. Ruth looked at Imani. Then at the baby. Then back up at the man she had once kept alive on the cold shoulder of a road. Well, she said. Seems you found me now. The words landed gently. But underneath them was something far heavier than the moment itself. Something about timing. About the way certain things have a habit of circling back, and arriving exactly when they are needed most. Nana, Imani said quietly. We got milk. Ruth blinked. Milk. Theo was hungry. So I went out to find some. He knocked on a lot of doors. And then I found his house. She nodded toward Nathan. He gave us milk and soup, and then he drove us all the way here, to you. Ruth's gaze returned to Nathan, and something in her face shifted. Not surprise. Not even gratitude, exactly. Something quieter than either. The recognition of a thing long out of balance, beginning at last to settle back level. You didn't have to do all that, she said. Nathan shook his head slowly. Yes, ma'am, he said. I did. A nurse stepped in to check the monitor, and her face was kind but careful. We'll need to limit visitors now, she said. She's stable. But her heart is under a lot of strain. She needs rest. Imani nodded at once, the way she nodded at every instruction, as if obedience were the one thing she could always offer the world. But she didn't let go of her grandmother's hand right away. Ruth's thin fingers curled weakly around the girl's. You stay close, she murmured. I will. Don't go wandering off again. Y won't they, Nana? And this time, the words weren't only obedience. They were a promise. Out in the corridor, the doctor found them. It was somewhere in his late 40s, tired but sharp-eyed, a man who had clearly spent too many nights in rooms like these and had learned to carry urgency without ever letting it spill over into panic. Meneer Brandt. I'm Dr. Vance. He glanced at the tablet in his hand, then back up. Mrs. Caldwell is in a fragile state. We're still running tests. But it looks as though she suffered a serious cardiac event tonight, and there may be conditions underneath it that we need to examine more closely. Is she going to be all right? Imani asked, very quietly. Dr. Vance crouched, bringing himself to her level. We're doing everything we can. And she's strong. That helps. Imani held onto the word strong as if it were something solid she could stand on. The doctor straightened and turned back to Nathan. We'll need to move her to a monitored unit soon. More tests. Possibly a procedure, depending on what we find. And Nathan understood what the man was not quite saying out loud. There would be costs. Hospitals do not run on kindness. They run on systems. Billing codes. Insurance approvals. Decisions made far from the bedside, by people who will never once see the patient's face. Does she have coverage? Nathan asked. The doctor hesitated, just long enough to answer the question without speaking it. There are some gaps in her file. What does that mean? Eleanor asked. And this time her crossed arms held concern, not impatience. It means, the doctor said carefully, that certain treatments may require authorization. And authorization can take time. Dime. Nathan looked over at Imani, sitting still as a stone, her hands wrapped around her brother, her eyes fixed on the closed door of her grandmother's room. She did not understand insurance. She did not understand authorization, or delay. She understood one thing only. Waiting. And in that instant Nathan understood, with a cold and sudden clarity, that in a place like this, waiting itself could become the difference between everything and nothing. How much time? He asked. The doctor began to explain the limits. The approvals. The advanced intervention that might require. Nathan cut him off, gently. Don't wait. Dr. Vance studied him. Do whatever needs to be done, Nathan said. Whatever it is. Don't let paperwork slow it down. Amy Brandt, I can't authorize, I can. The doctor glanced at him. You're not listed as family. Nathan looked once more at the closed door, then back at the man in front of him. I'm the reason she lived long enough to need treatment, he said. It wasn't quite accurate. But it wasn't wrong, either. He reached into his coat, drew out a card, and handed it over. Call whoever you need to call. Run whatever you need to run. And if it ever comes down to a choice between waiting and acting, you act. The doctor looked at the card. Then back at the man holding it. And something in his expression changed. Not deference, exactly. The recognition of certainty. I'll make sure the team knows, he said. Do that. When the doctor had gone, Eleanor turned to her husband. That was a lot. It was necessary. You don't even know the whole situation yet. I know enough. She studied him for a long moment. You've spent your life around hospitals. You know exactly how this machine works. And you're stepping in front of it anyway. Nathan looked over at Imani again, small against the long row of chairs, holding the baby as though letting go were not one of the choices available to her. She came up onto my porch with a folded piece of paper and a child in her arms, he said quietly. She already did the hardest part. What followed was the longest night Nathan could remember. They moved Ruth upstairs, to the cardiac floor, where the clamor of the emergency room fell away and the air turned cool and ordered. Imani would not leave. She sat in the chair beside the bed, her hand returning again and again to her grandmother's, refusing sleep, refusing fear, refusing anything that might pull her attention from the woman lying there. And somewhere in those small hours, Eleanor crossed a line she had not planned to cross. She sat down beside the girl. She unwrapped the bread she had carried from the house. You never finished this, she said. And Imani, after a long pause, took a piece. It was a small thing. But Nathan watched it happen, and he understood that something inside his wife had quietly turned, and was not going to turn back. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, and let the truth of it settle over him at last. 10 years ago, a woman with no reason to stop had knelt on a dark road beside a dying stranger and refused to let him slip away. Tonight her granddaughter had knocked on his door and asked for half a glass of milk. Some debts do not arrive with an invoice. Some debts come back to you wearing a child's worn coat. And this one was not going to be delayed, denied, or left sitting in a chair outside a closed door. By morning, the cardiologist had a name and a plan. Dr. Edison. He laid it out plainly. A serious blockage, years in the making. A procedure that carried risk, but far less risk than doing nothing at all. You should do it, Nana, Imani said. Ruth gave the faintest smile. You always this bossy? Yes, ma'am. That drew the smallest sound of laughter from Eleanor. The first of the whole long night. We'd like to proceed today, the doctor said. The sooner, the better. Do it, Nathan said. We'll need consent. I'll sign whatever you put in front of me. Ruth looked at him for a long moment. You sure about that? Nathan met her eyes. Yes, ma'am. I'm sure. She studied him the way she must have once studied a dark road, weighing the odds, and then she gave a single small nod. All right, then. They took her in a little while later. Imani walked alongside the moving bed, refusing to release her grandmother's hand until the very last possible second, until the doors of the procedure suite reached the line past which she could not follow. This is as far as you can come, the nurse said. Imani stopped. Her hand lingered in Ruth's for one final moment, then slipped free. I'll be right here, she said. I'll be right back, Ruth answered. It was a promise neither of them could truly guarantee. But it was a promise they both needed to hear. The doors closed. And the waiting began. Nathan did not pace. He stood very still, and his stillness was its own kind of tension. Eleanor walked a few steps and then back again, unable to settle. And Imani did not move at all. She sat with Theo curled against her, her eyes fixed on the doors, and once, very softly, almost to herself, she whispered, "She said you should never leave people waiting." Nathan heard it. "She won't," he said. And when the doors finally opened again, after what felt far longer than it should have, Dr. Ellison stepped out, looked at the three of them, and said the only word that mattered. The procedure went well. The tension in the hallway broke. Not loudly. Not all at once. But it broke. Imani's shoulders dropped for the first time since the doors had closed. She let out a long, held breath. She's okay. She's stable. We were able to clear the blockage. She need time to recover. But this was the right step, and we took it in time. Imani nodded, accepting every word without needing any more. And as they stood there, outside the doors that had held everything in the balance only minutes before, Nathan understood something with absolute clarity. The hardest part was not over. But the direction was set. It was no longer here only to carry this family through one bad night. It was here to make sure they never had to face a night like it alone again. Later, while Ruth rested in recovery, Nathan stepped a few feet down the hall and finally took out his phone. The screen lit up with a whole world that had been waiting on him. Missed calls. Emails. Reminders. He ignored every one of them, and dialed a single different number. It rang once. Mere Brandt. Call. I need you to clear my calendar for the next several days. Move it, delegate it, cancel it if you have to. And I need you to find out everything you can about a woman named Ruth Caldwell. Her medical history. Her housing. Her finances. Quietly, and with respect. I pause on the line. Understood. Is this a new account? No, Nathan said. It's personal. That was all Cole needed to hear. The day Ruth left the hospital did not feel like an ending. There were no speeches. No dramatic goodbyes. Only a quiet series of small, deliberate movements that carried more weight than any ceremony could have. Papers signed. Instructions reviewed. A follow-up appointment set, every detail handled, nothing left uncertain. Eleanor had taken over the careful work without anyone asking her to, checking the bag at the foot of the bed, making sure nothing important got left behind. She had found her place in all of it, without ever quite announcing that she had. They drove first to the small apartment, to gather a few things. It was clean, and modest, and full of the quiet order of a woman who had spent her whole life making a little stretch a long way. Imani moved quickly, taking only what she truly needed. A small bag. Theo's things. A few folded clothes. Eleanor, watching her, gently added the things the girl hadn't thought to take. An extra pair of shoes. A small framed photograph from the shelf. We don't need all that, Imani said. Eleanor smiled. You might. Ruth stood in the doorway, taking it all in one last time. This place did what it could, she said. It did, Nathan agreed, stepping up beside her. But it isn't enough anymore. No. She looked at him. Then we don't come back to it the same way we left. No, ma'am, he said. We don't. The draft that followed was different from every draft that had come before it. Imani leaned back into the seat, her body finally letting go of the tension it had carried so long it had forgotten it was carrying anything at all. Theo slept peacefully against her. Eleanor rested a hand on the girl's shoulder, a gesture that had somehow become natural. After a while, Imani spoke. Mr. Brandt. Yes. Are we still allowed to knock on your door? The question was simple. But it held inside it everything that had brought them to this car, on this road, on this particular afternoon. Nathan glanced at her in the mirror. You won't need to knock, he said. She frowned it, just slightly. Why not? Because you'll already be welcome. She thought about that for a moment. And then she nodded. The car turned onto a quiet street lined with trees, and pulled into a long driveway. The house stood ahead of them, its windows catching the afternoon light. And one lamp, just inside the front hall, was already glowing. Imani noticed it at once. You left it on, she said. Nathan switched off the engine. I told you I would. She smiled. Not white. Not loud. But real. They stepped out of the car together. And this time there was no hesitation at the door. No uncertainty. No need to ask. Nathan opened it, and instead of a barrier, it felt at last like what a door is supposed to be. An entrance. A place where no one has to stand outside, in the cold, wondering whether they will be turned away. Imani walked in first, Theo in her arms, Eleanor beside her, Ruth following slow but steady. And Nathan paused for just a moment on the threshold. He looked at the light. At the warm space it filled. At everything it had come to mean in the span of a single night. Then he stepped inside, and closed the door behind them. Not to shut the world out. But to hold something new, and fragile, and worth keeping, safely in place. Because some doors are meant to stay closed. But others, once they are finally opened, are meant to stay that way. This story is a quiet reminder that kindness is never measured by how much we give. It is measured by whether we choose to act at all, in the very moment when it would be so much easier to look away. A single small thing, an open door, a warm cup held out in the dark, can turn the whole course of a life in ways we could never have predicted. It reminds us, though, that the world is not always fair. That no child should ever have to carry a baby brother through a cold city, knocking on locked doors, only to find one glass of milk. And yet it reminds us that ordinary people still hold the power to set a small piece of that unfairness right, through nothing more than courage, attention, and the simple willingness to stay. Most of all, it reminds us that real help is not a single moment. It is a commitment. When we choose not to turn away, when we decide to keep the light burning long after the emergency has passed, we become the very thing that someone else has been searching for, out there, in the dark. This is a work of fiction, created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are imagined. They do not represent any real people, or any true story. This content is intended for storytelling and reflection only.